All right, let's jump right into this explainer and uncover how the famously peaceful Swiss nation was actually forged through centuries of, well, really bloody conflict. Today, Switzerland is universally known for its delicious chocolate, the founding of the Red Cross, and its steadfast, unwavering neutrality. Wedged right in the middle of Europe, it's a humble, non-belligerent nation that has scarcely made a bad name for itself in recent history. But, when we think of Switzerland, we almost never think of violence or political turmoil. We are going to completely unpack that perception today, because the nation officially known as the Swiss Confederation has an incredibly turbulent origin story.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll dismantle the myth of Swiss peace, trace the violent steps of the old Confederacy, examine how religion nearly tore them apart, look at Napoleon's role, and finally, ask exactly why this unlikely union survived. Section 1. The myth of Swiss peace, dismantling the neutrality narrative. Take a look at Switzerland today. It's a modern nation of 8.6 million people seamlessly united despite distinct linguistic borders. You've got roughly 64% Swiss German speakers, 22% French speakers, 8% Italian speakers, and the remaining 6% speaking Romansh. Geographically, they're tightly wedged between Italy, France, Germany, and Austria. I mean, it is incredibly rare to see a state function so harmoniously with 4 official languages. But as we're about to see, this harmony definitely did not come naturally or easily. When we picture Switzerland today, we usually think of those stunning, quiet Alps and absolute neutrality, completely forgetting how this confederation actually began. This peaceful perception hides a reality born from severe destabilization. The people living there weren't trying to build some peaceful utopia. They were literally just trying to survive in a very dangerous neighborhood. It's a great reminder that true stability is often forged in the fires of necessity.
Moving on to Section 2, the Old Swiss Confederacy, forged in a destabilized environment. The region endured a super long, tumultuous journey under various empires before 3 cantons finally said, enough is enough, in 1291. Going all the way back to the BC era, the land was occupied by Helvetic Celts before being swallowed up by the Roman Empire. From there, it was basically a revolving door of conquerors. The region was passed between Germanic tribes, it fell under Charlemagne, and eventually it was absorbed into the massive Holy Roman Empire. So this famous alliance, it definitely didn't start with peace. It started as a desperate defense strategy. In 1291, the cantons of Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden sat down and agreed to a federal charter. They needed to jointly manage their common interests, specifically their defense and their economy. Historians, and the modern Swiss state for that matter, point to this 1291 charter as the true starting line for the nation. Well, that initial alliance worked out incredibly well, and it expanded rapidly by the 15th century. Those original 3 members welcomed the city-states of Lucerne, Zurich, and Bern, plus the cantons of Glegeris and Zug. But as you can imagine, expanding your territory in medieval Europe rarely goes unnoticed. The Austrians, led by Leopold III, were not happy at all with this growing confederacy encroaching on their ambitions. Early Switzerland was fiercely territorial and absolutely willing to fight. Throughout the late 14th century, the Swiss repeatedly clashed with Austria. The Battle of Naufels in 1388 was a monumental turning point, a remarkable triumph that proved these allied cantons were a legitimate military force. They were proving they could punch well above their weight class. And that brings us to 1499 and the Swabian War against the Habsburgs, an event that practically granted the Swiss de facto independence from the Holy Roman Empire. The root of this conflict was, once again, territorial disputes, as the Swiss were continuing their expansion at the expense of Austria. The war lasted from January to September,
and the resulting peace treaty massively favored the Swiss. While still officially part of the Holy Roman Empire on paper, they were now functionally independent from the very empire they had just defeated. They even added Basel and Schaffhausen to the Confederacy shortly after in 1501.
Section 3, Wars and Religious Divides. The Confederacy shaken. Okay, so this seemingly invincible Swiss expansion eventually hit a massive roadblock. In September 1515, the Battle of Marignano against France in Venice violently humbled the Swiss and completely shattered their aura of invincibility. Up until this point, the Swiss felt somewhat bulletproof. But this crushing defeat put a hard stop to their aggressive outward expansion. Yet, incredibly, the Confederation stood strong through the military loss. Their next and perhaps greatest threat wouldn't actually come from a foreign army, but from an idea.
The next major threat came from within. The Protestant Reformation shattered internal unity, literally pitting neighbors against each other. The Swiss were directly affected by the Reformation. Influences from Martin Luther in Germany, along with local figures like Zwingli and Calvin, swept through the cantons. Many Swiss aligned with Protestantism, causing a massive ideological rift with the remaining Catholic cantons. The alliance that had successfully fought off the Holy Roman Empire was suddenly fracturing from the inside out. These internal religious wars were brutal, yet the shared economic and defensive interests somehow managed to hold the fragile alliance together. You have periods of intense violence, like the Wars of Kappel and the Wars of Villmargen. It's fascinating to realize that these cantons were physically fighting each other over religion, but when the dust settled, their mutual need for shared defense and economic stability proved just slightly stronger than their religious animosity. They needed each other to survive the greater European landscape. It took centuries of fighting for the Swiss to officially sever ties with the Holy Roman Empire. By the mid-17th century, with the signing of the Treaty of Westphalia, the Swiss Confederacy finally gained full, officially recognized independence. This also marked the early roots of that famous Swiss neutrality. But freedom, as they say, is never permanently secure. Section 4, Napoleon to Modern Unity, Rebuilding the State. The modern era surprisingly started with the complete loss of Swiss freedom. In the late 18th century, Napoleon marched his troops right into the Swiss cantons, proving that a loose confederacy was highly vulnerable to a centralized empire. The annexation was successful, and he established a centralized government, forcing this fiercely independent network of states to exist as a single entity under French control. It actually took until the Congress of Vienna in 1815 to undo the French annexation, re-establish neutrality, and add Valais, Neuchâtel, and Geneva. After almost 2 decades of French control, the old Confederacy was restored. The Congress of Vienna reconfirmed the neutrality they had established back in the 17th century and finalized the borders by bringing in the final cantons. But simply putting the old borders back didn't magically solve the underlying internal tensions. Freedom brought new civil disputes, and violently opposing views on how to govern practically forced the nation to modernize. Once free from France, the civil divides flared up again. The traditional Catholics wanted to keep the old, decentralized structure where cantons had almost total autonomy. Meanwhile, the liberal Protestants pushed hard for a unified federal state to heal the divides and strengthen the nation as a whole. The Protestant vision ultimately secured a victory: a unified federal constitution heavily modeled after the United States. In 1848, the Swiss finalized this new framework. They updated it in 1874 and 1891 to heavily emphasize direct, referendum-based democracy, which is a massive pillar of their political identity today, followed by a few slight modern amendments in 1999. That 1848 Constitution brought some sweeping changes. specifically ending the centuries-old practice of Swiss mercenaries fighting foreign wars. While they centralized the federal state, they smartly guaranteed deep autonomy for the cantons to keep the peace. They also included a unique clause that allows the entire constitution to be completely rewritten if necessary. And crucially, they banned Swiss troops from serving abroad, cementing their neutrality once and for all, with one notable historic exception you might actually recognize today: the Swiss Guard protecting the Pope at the Vatican.
Finally, Section 5, the why behind Switzerland, a union forced by division.
So modern Switzerland slowly integrated into the global community, cementing its reputation as a peaceful political entity, but never forgetting its turbulent roots. Throughout the 20th century, they famously stayed completely out of both world wars. They carefully started joining international groups, the Council of Europe in '63, eventually the United Nations in 2002. And while they withdrew efforts to join the European Union, they did vote to join the Schengen area to maintain close ties with their neighbors. They became the peaceful Switzerland we know today. But why did these fiercely independent cantons finally unite in the first place?
The rulers originally just wanted autonomy from foreign empires, but it was the tragedy of internal division that truly birthed unified Switzerland we know today. The severe pain of the Protestant and Catholic civil wars proved to the people that a loose alliance just wasn't enough anymore. Unity wasn't some lofty ideal. It was a pure survival tactic. A modern constitution and a federal government were the absolute only ways to heal the divide and survive. Peace wasn't just handed to the Swiss. It was a desperate, necessary invention born out of centuries of conflict. Which leaves us with this final thought. Are the most stable institutions the ones forged in the fiercest fires?